Today, we're going to dive into one of the most concentrated and just brutal clashes of World War II's Pacific campaign. We're talking about a battle for a tiny strip of coral that was over in just 76 hours, but its bloody lessons would echo all the way to the end of the war. This is the story of the Battle of Tarawa.
So to really get this, you first have to understand the mindset of the defenders. Their commander, Rear Admiral Kiji Shibazaki, was incredibly confident. He looked at the fortress his men had built on this tiny island of Betio and made this unbelievably defiant boast. He truly believed it was absolutely 100% impregnable. And then it was over. In just a little over 3 days, it fell. This shocking contrast, 100 years versus 76 hours. That's the core of the Tarawa story. So how on earth did the U.S. Marines manage to conquer this supposedly unconquerable fortress so quickly? And, maybe more importantly, what was the staggering price of that victory?
Okay, let's really dig into this. Why were the Japanese so sure of themselves? What made this one tiny island, Betio, seem like a fortress that could hold out for a century?
Just look at this. The sheer density of firepower here is insane. The island itself is tiny, just 2 miles long and barely half a mile wide, but crammed onto it were nearly 500 pillboxes, dozens of artillery pieces, and massive 8-inch coastal guns. For almost a full year, the Japanese had turned every single inch of sand into an interlocking killing zone. It was a death trap by design. So, how do you deal with a fortress like that? Well, the American plan was pretty simple. Just overwhelm it with absolutely massive, overwhelming force. They put together the largest invasion fleet the Pacific had seen up to that point, totally confident that sheer numbers and firepower could just blast the defenders into nothing. And this chart, it just lays it all out, right? The mismatch on paper is staggering. The U.S. brought 17 aircraft carriers to Japan's 0, 12 battleships to their 0, and about 35,000 troops against fewer than 5,000 defenders. Looking at this, you can totally see why American planners thought this would be a pretty straightforward, if tough, victory.
But here's the thing. All that military might, all that planning, it was all about to come crashing down. And not because of a Japanese weapon, but because of one single, overlooked force of nature that was about to turn the waters around Tarawa into a nightmare.
The whole invasion hinged on one thing, the tide. Planners were counting on a 5-foot tide to get their landing craft over a shallow coral reef. But on the day of the invasion, what they got was something called a neap tide, basically the weakest tide you can get. This left only 3 feet of water over the reef, and their boats, well, they needed 4 feet to clear it. You can see the disaster unfolding right there. Someone who was there that day put it in this really haunting way. He just said, the ocean just sat there. It wouldn't rise. And that one fatal miscalculation meant the Marines weren't going to be dropped off on the beach. They were going to be dropped hundreds of yards out in the open water. Okay, so let's walk through how this nightmare played out. The day starts with a massive naval bombardment. Then, at 9 a.m., the attack begins. But just 5 minutes later, bam! The landing craft hit the reef and just stop. Dead in the water. The Marines have no choice but to get out and wade 500 yards to shore. That's the length of 5 football fields, completely exposed to Japanese machine guns and artillery that had survived the shelling. It was just a slow, agonizing march into a wall of fire. Through sheer guts and unbelievable determination, the Marines clawed their way ashore, and after 76 hours of hell, they took the island. But it was a victory bought with a currency that just absolutely horrified the American public: human lives. The battle ended in the near-total annihilation of the island's garrison. Out of 4,690 defenders on the island, almost every single one was killed. And this next number? This tells you everything you need to know about how fiercely they fought. Only 17 were taken prisoner. 17! They fought almost literally to the very last man. But this was the number that hit the American public like a punch to the gut. Over 3,000 American casualties in just 3 days. The public was stunned. The losses were so bad, they actually sparked protests back home. People were asking, for what? For this tiny island we've never even heard of? And this debate wasn't just happening in newspapers. It was happening at the very top of the military. On one side, you have General Holland Smith, who saw the carnage firsthand and basically called the whole thing a terrible mistake. But on the other, you have Admiral Chester Nimitz, the top commander, who argued it was a necessary, brutal first step
the key that unlocked the rest of Japan's defenses in the Pacific.
So, was it worth it? That's the big question, right? And the answer, believe it or not, might not be about taking the island itself. It's about the painful, bloody lessons that were learned there. Lessons that would end up saving thousands of lives in the battles that came after.
Tarawa was a brutal, brutal teacher, but the lessons it taught were invaluable. First, no more guessing about tides. From now on, detailed beach recon was mandatory. Second, those short bombardments, not going to cut it. Future attacks would be preceded by days, sometimes weeks, of relentless shelling. Third, they created the underwater demolition teams, the direct ancestors of the Navy SEALs, to clear obstacles before the main assault. And finally, they fast-tracked the development of better, tougher amphibious vehicles. Period.
And here's the most important part. These weren't just lessons written down in some report. They were put into action immediately. The knowledge paid for in blood at Tarawa was used to plan every major amphibious invasion that followed, like at Saipan, and even all the way to the D-Day landings in Europe. They made sure the same mistakes never, ever happened again.
So that brings us back to the big question. Was the horror of Tarawa a necessary tragedy? A brutal, costly mistake that, paradoxically, had to happen to teach the lessons that would ultimately help win the war? It's a tough one, and it's something people still debate to this day.